I passed out in the break room at the end of my 12-hour shift. Not dramatically, not the way they show it in movies. No one caught me, no one saw it coming. One moment I was standing at the counter reaching for the coffee pot, and the next, my cheek was pressed against the cold linoleum floor, and someone was calling my name from very far away. The last thing I remember before the floor rushed up was thinking, I need to eat something. And then immediately after, I can't. I spent the grocery money. When I woke up, my supervisor was crouched beside me, her hand on my shoulder, her face doing that thing faces do when they're trying to look calm and failing at it. My coworker Jamie was standing in the doorway, one hand over her mouth. I was still in my scrubs. My name badge was pressing into my cheek. The coffee pot I had reached for was upright on the counter, untouched, which meant I had gone down before I even made contact with it. There was a small white envelope on the table above me. It had 2 words written on it in handwriting I didn't recognize. My full name, Claire Renee Mercer. Not Claire, not C. Mercer like on my badge. My full legal name, middle name included. I hadn't heard anyone use my middle name in years. My name is Claire Mercer. I'm 29 years old. I work as a registered nurse at a mid-size hospital in Seattle, Washington. I moved here from Harlan County, Kentucky, 5 years ago with 2 suitcases and a scholarship that barely covered my first semester. I built my career from nothing. I built my credit from nothing. I built my entire adult life from nothing, which turned out to be a much easier task than building it out from under my family. I was the oldest of 3. My sister Bethany was 26 and had the emotional regulation of a 16-year-old and the spending habits to match. My brother Danny was 23 and had been in and out of jobs since he graduated high school. My mother managed them both from the small house in Harlan she'd lived in her whole life, a house she'd been renting from her landlord for 11 years and would never own because every time they got close to a down payment, there was an emergency. The emergencies were always real. That was the thing that made it so hard. It was never invented. Bethany's car actually did need new brakes. Danny actually did lose his job at the warehouse. My mother's furnace actually did go out in January. The crises were real. The pattern they created was also real, and it had a name. I was the only person in that family with stable income and good credit, which meant I was the one who got called. I want to tell you that I always said yes out of love. I want to tell you that I was a generous person. But the truth is more complicated than that. I said yes because saying no meant I was the cold one, the one who left, the one who thought she was better than everyone else because she moved to the big city and became a nurse. Saying no meant 3 days of silence from my mother, followed by a call from my aunt saying, "Honey, your mama is real upset." Saying no meant Bethany posting vague things on Facebook about how some people forget where they came from. Saying no was a cost I couldn't afford, so I kept saying yes, and slowly, quietly, I started running out. It had been going on for 4 years. A few hundred here for Bethany's car insurance. 700 there for Danny's security deposit when he moved into a new place. The big one, the one I still couldn't look at directly, was the personal loan I'd taken out in my own name for my mother's dental surgery. $1,600. She was going to pay me back $50 a month. She had paid me back $50 total, once, on the first month, and then the payments stopped, and neither of us mentioned it again, because mentioning it would have made me the villain. I picked up extra shifts. I dropped my gym membership. I switched from the grocery store to the discount food outlet 3 blocks further away. I started eating at the hospital when I could, quietly collecting crackers from patient trays when they went untouched, the way you do when you're hungry and ashamed of being hungry and sure that if you just work harder, everything will balance out. It never balanced out. It couldn't. I was pouring water into a bucket that had no bottom. The week I passed out, Bethany had called on a Sunday night. Her voice was that specific blend of tearful and annoyed that I had long since learned meant she wanted something. Her roommate had given her 2 weeks' notice and she couldn't cover the rent alone. She needed $400 by Friday. That was $400 I didn't have. Not cleanly, not without leaving myself completely exposed until my next paycheck. But I could hear the specific catch in her breathing that meant she had been crying before she called me, and I thought about her sitting alone in that apartment, and I transferred the money at 11 o'clock at night in my own kitchen, eating crackers over the sink for dinner. 3 days later, I was on the floor. My supervisor, whose name was Donna, helped me into a chair and put a protein bar in my hand and looked at me with the clinical concern of someone who had worked in a hospital long enough to know what low blood sugar looked like and also what long-term exhaustion looked like. She didn't ask me why I hadn't eaten. She didn't push. She just handed me the protein bar and said, "Take your time." Then she pointed to the envelope on the table. "A man dropped this off at the front desk," she said. "He asked for you by name, full name. The woman at the desk said he was older, maybe late 60s, very well dressed. He said it was for Claire Renee Mercer, and that she should open it when she was ready. He was gone before they could ask any questions." I stared at the envelope. I didn't know anyone in Seattle who would use my middle name. My friends called me Claire. My coworkers called me Mercer sometimes. My family called me Claire Bear when they wanted something and just Claire when they were disappointed in me. No one had written my full name since my nursing license came in the mail. I opened it right there in the break room, my hands not quite steady, the protein bar half-eaten in my lap. Inside was a card. Heavy stock, cream-colored, the kind that costs more than it should. There was a name on it, Margaret Holloway, and below that, an address in Portland, Oregon. And below that, in careful, neat handwriting, a single line. "Your great-aunt would like you to know she is thinking of you. Please call. Time is short." My great-aunt. I set the card on the table and just looked at it for a long moment. The name my mother used when she talked about her Aunt Margaret was never just Margaret. It was always followed by something else. That woman. Her with all her money and none of her sense. Your grandmother's sister who thought she was too good for the rest of us. Aunt Margaret existed in my family's vocabulary, the way a bad smell exists in a room unacknowledged but always present, a quiet, defining thing. I knew almost nothing real about her. What I knew came in pieces, delivered with contempt. She had left Harlan County decades ago. She had made money, the kind of money people in Harlan talked about with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. She had no children. She had never come back. She and my grandmother had a falling out over something no one would explain clearly, and after my grandmother passed, Aunt Margaret was simply erased. My mother did not speak of her. When I was young and asked why, I was told she was a selfish woman who chose herself over her family, and that was all the explanation I ever received. Now her name was on a card in my hand in a hospital break room in Seattle, and someone had brought it here specifically for me, and it said time is short. I called the number on the back of the card the next morning from my car in the hospital parking garage. It rang twice, and then a man answered. His voice was even and careful, the voice of someone accustomed to delivering difficult information without drama. He introduced himself as her attorney. He told me that my great-aunt, Margaret Ann Holloway, had been living in Portland for the last 30 years. He told me she was 74 years old. He told me she had been ill for the past year and that she was now in hospice care. And then he told me that she had been aware of me for some time and that she had asked him to reach out before it was too late. I asked him what that meant, aware of me. He said he would explain everything in person. He said she wanted to meet me, if I was willing. He said Portland was a 90-minute flight from Seattle. He said she did not have much time. I sat in my car for 20 minutes after I hung up. I thought about the card and the careful handwriting and the protein bar and the linoleum floor. I thought about the $400 I had sent to Bethany and the $50 my mother had never paid back and the loan that was still sitting in my credit file like a small stone in a shoe. I thought about the crackers. I bought a bus ticket to Portland. I couldn't justify the flight. Her house was in a quiet neighborhood near the river. Her attorney, whose name was Robert Okafor, met me at the front door. He was a tall, composed man in his 50s who shook my hand and led me through a house that smelled of old books and something floral and faint, the kind of smell that is somehow both comforting and sad. He spoke as we walked, in a low, even voice, the way you speak in a house where someone is dying. "She's lucid today," he said. "She wants to talk to you herself. I'll be nearby." I want to tell you that I walked into that room feeling prepared. I didn't. I walked in feeling like I had stepped sideways into someone else's life, into a story I hadn't been told the beginning of. She was smaller than I expected. She was propped up against 2 pillows in a hospital bed that had been moved into what was clearly her bedroom, and she was watching the door when I came through it, like she had been watching the door for a while. Her eyes were sharp and gray and very much alive even if the rest of her wasn't. She looked at me for a long moment without speaking, and then she smiled, the complicated smile of someone holding many things at once. "You look like your grandmother," she said. "Before everything." I didn't know how to answer that, so I sat in the chair next to her bed and I said, "I don't know very much about you." "I know," she said. "That was your mother's doing, not mine. I want you to know that, before anything else. I never stopped trying to know you." She talked for an hour. Her voice was thin and she tired easily, but she talked. She told me about the falling out with my grandmother, which turned out to be about money, the way most falling outs in families are. Aunt Margaret had built a business. She had done it on her own, against the opinion of everyone in Harlan who told her she was foolish and unwomanly and going to fail. She had not failed. She had sold the business 15 years later for more money than anyone in her family had ever seen, and her younger sister, my grandmother, had believed she was owed a share of it simply by virtue of being family, and when that share was not forthcoming, there had been a rupture that never healed. "I sent gifts," she said. "When you were born, when your sister was born, Christmas, every year. Did you ever receive any of them?" "No," I said. She nodded. "I thought not. I hired someone to check, quietly, when you were about 16. He told me you were working already." She paused. "I want you to know that I almost intervened then. I nearly drove down to Harlan and knocked on the door and said something that would have made your mother never speak to me again. But you were 16, and I thought you had time. I thought things would get better. I didn't say anything." "They didn't, did they?" she said. "It wasn't a question." I told her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. The loan, the transfers, the crackers, the floor. She listened without interrupting. And when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. And then she reached over to the nightstand and picked up a small, folded piece of paper and held it out to me. "This is yours," she said. "I wrote it months ago. I was waiting for the right moment, and then Robert told me what his colleague saw at the hospital, and I thought, well, there isn't a right moment. There's only now." I unfolded the paper. It was a letter, written in the same careful handwriting as the card. It was not long. It explained that she had set up a trust in my name 2 years ago. It explained that she had no children, no partner, and very little family she chose to remain in contact with. It explained that the bulk of her estate, her Portland home, her investment accounts, her remaining business assets, was to be transferred to me upon her death, held in trust, and managed by Robert Okafor. At the bottom of the page she had written the total figure. I read it 3 times. Then I set the paper in my lap and looked at the wall for a moment. It was a number with 6 digits. It was a number that meant I could pay off every debt that carried my name. It was a number that meant I could eat. She was watching me. Her expression was careful, not triumphant, just tired and something close to sorry. "I am not doing this to buy your love," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm doing it because it's right, and because I should have done something sooner, and because you deserve a foundation that nobody can pull out from under you." "There's a condition," Robert said quietly from the doorway. She looked at him, then back at me. "He's going to explain the details after. But the simple version is this. The trust is structured to protect you, from yourself, if necessary. You cannot continue to fund your family's choices with these assets. If you drain yourself the same way you've been drained, Robert has the authority to freeze distributions until you've demonstrated, legally, that you're not acting under duress." I thought about Bethany's voice on Sunday nights. I thought about the specific pitch of my mother's silence. "I understand," I said. I stayed with her for 2 more hours that day. We talked about smaller things. She asked about nursing, what it was actually like. She asked about Seattle. She asked, near the end, if I liked it there, genuinely liked it, and I thought about it honestly before I answered. I said yes. I said it was the first place I'd ever lived where I felt like I was building something instead of just surviving. She died 11 days later. I was on shift when Robert called. I stepped into the hallway outside a patient's room and listened to his even, careful voice. And when he was done, I thanked him and stood there against the wall for a moment with my phone in my hand. I cried a little. I was surprised by that, how much I cried for a woman I had spent 11 hours with in total. But I think I was also crying for the 29 years before that, for the gifts that were returned, For the 16-year-old working double shifts who had an aunt 2 states away who was almost brave enough to intervene. For the will was to be read in Portland. Robert asked me to attend in person. I requested 3 days off from work and drove down rather than flew, needing the drive, needing the hours of interstate and pine trees, and the sense of moving through space deliberately. The will reading was in Robert's office, a clean, light-filled room on the 4th floor of a building downtown. I arrived early. My mother and Bethany arrived 20 minutes late. I had not told them about Aunt Margaret. I had not told them about the card or the visit or the conversation. I had gone back to my life in the 2 weeks since and said nothing. And the silence had been so total and so strange that it had changed the shape of my days. I had started eating dinner at my kitchen table again. I had stopped flinching when my phone rang. They came through the door in a wave of tension and familiar perfume. My mother in a dark blue dress she wore to church, Bethany in jeans and a blazer that looked borrowed. My mother's eyes swept the room and landed on me, and then moved immediately to Robert, assessing. Danny hadn't come. Bethany told me quietly, before Robert began, that he didn't want to make the drive. I thought about what that said about each of them, and I filed it away. Robert began with the formal language of estate law, which moved slowly and meant very little to anyone in the room until it didn't. He covered the smaller bequests first. A friend from her business years received a sum, a local charity received another. And then he reached the section with my name, and he read it clearly, the way he did everything without drama, without hesitation. The remainder of the estate, the house, the accounts, my name. My mother's composure cracked almost immediately, not violently, not the way it might in a story, just a sharp intake of breath, and then her jaw going tight, and then the particular stillness that meant she was deciding how to respond. Bethany looked at me. Her expression was complicated in the way that only younger sisters can achieve, equal parts wounded and calculating. She barely knew you, my mother said. Her voice was controlled. She said it to Robert, not to me. She knew me, I said. We met. I visited her. My mother turned to look at me fully then. When? A few weeks ago. She reached out. She wanted to meet before she passed. You went to Portland and you didn't tell us. I went to meet a dying woman who asked to see me, I said. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't want to make it into something before it was something. She could have left this to the family, Bethany said. She said it the way she said everything, as a fact, as if the universe had made an error that needed correcting. She chose who to leave it to, I said. That was her right. The conversation after the reading was brief and cold and said everything in the spaces between the words. My mother told me this would divide the family. Bethany told me it wasn't fair. Neither of them asked how I was. Neither of them asked what Aunt Margaret was like, what she talked about, whether she had been at peace. The estate was the only subject that existed in the room. I drove back to Seattle the next day. I scheduled a call with Robert for the following week. I started the process of understanding what I had inherited, which was itself a kind of education, learning the language of accounts and assets and legal structures that no one in my family had ever needed to learn, because no one in my family had ever had anything worth structuring. I deposited the first distribution and paid off every debt in my name, the personal loan, the credit card that carried a balance I had never been fully responsible for. I closed 3 accounts and opened a new one at a different bank. I changed my billing address. I called each creditor and had my contact information updated, and I set fraud alerts on every bureau. I felt lighter after each call. Physically lighter, the way you feel when you have been carrying something so long you stop noticing its weight and then you put it down. I had been home 3 weeks when my mother called. She led with small talk, which she never did, which meant she was building to something. How was the drive? How was work? How were I feeling after everything? The performance of normalcy stretched for 4 minutes and then she arrived at the point. She needed help, she said. The landlord had raised the rent. It was $200 more a month, which was a lot, she said, when you're on a fixed income. I know, I said. That sounds hard. I was wondering, she said, if now that things had changed for you, if maybe you could help cover the difference. Just for a few months until they sorted things out. Just $200 a month. It wasn't much, she said, for someone in my position now. I sat with the phone against my ear, and I looked out my kitchen window at the parking lot below, at the ordinary gray afternoon of Seattle, and I thought about the card with my full name on it. I thought about the 11 days. I thought about the floor. "Mom," I said, "I'm not going to do that." The silence on the line changed quality. It became denser. "I'm not going to be able to help financially anymore," I said. "Not the way I have been. I love you, but I've been giving money I didn't have to situations I didn't create. And it wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't healthy, and it needs to stop," she said. "So having money has made you selfish." "Having nothing," I said, "made me give away things I needed to survive." That wasn't generosity. That was damage. She hung up, not dramatically, just quietly, a click, and then nothing. Bethany called 20 minutes later. Her opening was more direct. She said she heard I was cutting the family off now that I was rich. She said that was a real nice way to treat people who had been there for me my whole life. She said she hoped I was happy with myself. I let her finish. Then I said, "Bethany, 3 weeks ago I sent you $400 and I didn't have enough left to buy groceries. I passed out at work." Silence. "I'm not angry at you," I said, and I meant it, mostly. "But I can't keep doing this. I'm not your emergency fund. I never should have been. That wasn't okay," she said. "So you're just done with us?" "I'm not done with you," I said. "I'm done with the financial piece of it. If you want to have a relationship that isn't built on what I can give you, I'm genuinely open to that." She hung up too. They had both inherited the same gesture from somewhere. It was Robert who called me 2 weeks later with the piece of information I hadn't expected. His voice was the same as it always was, even and careful, but there was something under it. He said his office had received a call from a credit monitoring service that had been set up on my behalf. There had been an application for a credit card. It had been filed in my name, using my social security number, with a billing address in Harlan County, Kentucky. The application had been declined instantly because of the fraud alert. I sat down on my kitchen floor, not because I was dizzy this time, just because I needed to be lower. "Yesterday," Robert said. "This was submitted yesterday, Claire, after the estate was finalized and transferred. After you paid off your debts and closed those accounts. After all of that?" "Yes," I said. I knew what he was saying. He said it anyway, carefully. This was not desperation. This was not an emergency. This was a deliberate attempt to open a new line of credit in your name after you had explicitly and legally ceased financial involvement, that is, identity theft. I knew who had done it. I didn't know which one of them had been willing to go that far, and I wasn't sure the distinction mattered as much as I once would have thought it did. I filed the police report the same day. I sat across from a detective who had kind eyes and very little expression, and I laid out the timeline with the precision I had learned doing nursing documentation, date by date, dollar by dollar, clear and factual and without drama. I signed the affidavit. I walked out into the thin Seattle rain and sat in my car and felt not victorious, not righteous, just extraordinarily tired. Robert guided me through the next steps. He had done this before, in different configurations, for different clients, which was something I hadn't known people needed attorneys for until I needed one. He was professional and thorough and not unkind. He told me that given the financial history, the pattern of transfers, the loan I had taken in my own name for my mother's medical bill, the closed accounts, the fraudulent application there was enough for a criminal investigation and potentially charges. He also told me there was an alternative. He told me about the consent agreement. A consent agreement, he said, was a legal document. It was binding. It stated, in language that courts recognized, that the parties who signed it agreed to permanently cease all forms of financial contact with me, including requests, applications, use of my identity, and any other financial relationship. It was not a punishment. It was a boundary with legal teeth. If they sign it, he said, the criminal matter doesn't need to go further. The fraud alert stays on your file permanently. The record of the application stays, but there are no charges, no courtroom. And if they don't sign it, then we cooperate fully with the investigation. I thought for a long time, not about whether I was right. I had stopped needing to relitigate that particular question. I thought about what I actually wanted, which was something I had not let myself think about for most of my adult life. I didn't want them in jail. I didn't want my mother in a courtroom or Bethany crying in front of a judge. I wanted it to stop. I wanted a guarantee that it would stop, the kind that didn't depend on goodwill or shame or family obligation, the kind that had paperwork and consequences. Draw up the agreement, I said. Robert scheduled a call. All three of them on the line, their own attorney present. I sat in my apartment with my laptop open and my hands folded on the table. Robert spoke first, explaining the situation, the application, the fraud alert, the record, the options. There was silence on the other end that lasted long enough to tell me they had known about it before we called. My mother spoke first. She said it was a mistake. Robert said, the application used Claire's social security number and a billing address consistent with your residence. Bethany said, we didn't think it was a big deal. We thought maybe they made an error closing the account. I spoke then. I kept my voice level. I said, I paid the dental loan you never paid me back. I paid Bethany's rent every time she asked for 3 years. I sent Danny money for a deposit on an apartment he moved out of in 4 months. I passed out at work because I sent Bethany $400 and had nothing left. And then 2 days after you found out about the estate, after I made clear I wasn't doing this anymore, an application for a new credit card went out in my name from your zip code. The silence this time was different, thicker. I want you to sign the agreement, I said. And I want to be clear about what that means. It means this is done. The financial relationship is done, permanently, in a way that I don't have to enforce with guilt or arguments. A court will enforce it. If you try to open anything in my name, if you ask me for money in any form, the investigation reopens, with the full cooperation of my attorney's office, and I will not be asking for the generous option a second time. More silence. If you sign it, the investigation goes no further. You have a record of the application attempt, that's all. You keep your lives exactly as they are, without me in them financially, which is what they were always going to be anyway once I stopped being able to give. My mother said, you're not the person I raised. You raised me to be the strong one, I said. This is what that actually looks like. They signed. Not happily, not graciously, but they signed. Robert filed it and sent me the confirmation the following day. A clean digital document with 3 signatures that somehow felt like the quietest and most significant thing I had ever received. 6 months passed. Then another 6. The year turned over and I let it. I did not quit nursing. I had always actually loved it. The work itself. The way a 12-hour shift had a specific shape and momentum, and the kind of tiredness at the end of it that felt earned. What I changed was the conditions around it. I moved to a better apartment, nothing extravagant, just more light and less noise and a parking spot where I could see my car from the window. I started eating the way a person who is not afraid of food eats. I bought good olive oil and fresh pasta and took a cooking class because I had always wanted to and had always had a reason not to. I found a therapist who specialized in family systems. I sat across from her in a small room twice a month and talked about the shape that my childhood had made in me, the deep groove of giving, the reflex guilt, the particular way I still sometimes heard my phone ring and felt my stomach drop before I even looked at the screen. She was patient and matter-of-fact about it. She didn't call my family monsters. She helped me understand that people can be genuinely not evil and still cause genuine harm, and that understanding that didn't mean I had to absorb the harm anymore. I visited Aunt Margaret's Portland house twice before the estate sale. Robert was finalizing the paperwork and I had asked if I could walk through it one more time, alone. He handed me the key, and I drove down on a Saturday morning and let myself in through the front door. The house was quiet and smelled faintly still of her, the books and the floral and the particular quality of air in a place where someone has lived a long time and made it their own. I walked through the room slowly. I looked at her bookshelves, her kitchen, the view from her bedroom window toward the river. I sat in the chair next to where her bed had been. I had brought a photograph, one of the few from my grandmother's things that had made it to me through various hands over the years. It was black and white and showed 2 young women standing in front of what appeared to be a car, both squinting into the sun and laughing at something outside the frame. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written, Ellie and Maggie, Summer 1971. My grandmother and Aunt Margaret, both laughing. Before whatever had come between them, before the money and the silence and the 20-year erasure, I set the photograph on the windowsill and looked at them for a while. I don't know why they let it go the way they did, I said to the empty room. I don't know why my mother did either. I don't think they were bad people. I think people get scared and proud and they hold on too tight to the wrong things and then they're old and the window has passed. I picked up the photograph. I tucked it into my bag. You didn't let it pass, I said. You got there eventually. That counts. I drove back to Seattle in the late afternoon with the window down, the October air cold and clean. I had my first full paycheck in 5 years that was entirely mine, that would not be partially routed to Kentucky, that would not disappear before I could see it clearly. I was going to put some of it into the retirement account I had only just opened. I was going to put some of it into a savings account labeled down payment, because for the first time in my life that was a goal that had a realistic shape. I pulled into my parking spot and sat for a moment before getting out. I thought about a year ago. The protein bar and the floor and the envelope with my full name on it. I thought about walking into that room in Portland and meeting an old woman who had been trying to reach me for 20 years. I thought about the consent agreement and the document with 3 signatures and the fraud alert that was still, quietly, protecting me. Bethany had texted me once, 3 months after everything. It was short. It said, "I got a second job. Just thought you'd want to know." I had read it several times. I didn't respond right away. Eventually, I wrote back, "That's good. I hope it's going well." And I had left it there, an open door with no particular expectation attached to it, because I had learned, slowly, that I could love people from a distance that was determined by safety rather than guilt. My mother had not contacted me. I did not know if that meant she was angrier than Bethany, or more ashamed, or simply that the agreement had been effective. I did not call her. I thought about calling her sometimes. In the early morning when the light was coming in gray over the city and the day had not yet asked anything of me. I hadn't done it yet. I thought someday I might. On my own terms, in my own time, with no debt between us. The night before my 30th birthday, I sat on my apartment floor with my back against the couch and I looked at the room around me. The bookshelves I had built, the print I had framed from a street market, the plants that were alive because I watered them consistently and did not travel every few weeks to go fix someone else's emergency. The good knife block on the kitchen counter, the full refrigerator. I pulled my phone out and I set a timer for the morning, long enough to sleep well. I turned off my notifications. I thought about Aunt Margaret saying, "Time is short." I thought about how she had looked at me in that room, the complicated, tired smile of someone holding many things at once. I thought about how she had said you deserve a foundation that nobody can pull out from under you, and how, at the time, I had understood the words but not quite felt them, not quite believed they applied to me. I believed them now. The city was quiet in the way Seattle gets at midnight, not silent but settled, the hum of it tamped down to something almost peaceful. I stayed there on the floor for a while, not because I had to, not because there was nowhere else to go, but because it was mine, and I was choosing it. My revenge, I had thought it would feel like a verdict, like something external and final, a door slamming shut. But sitting there in my 30th year, in an apartment I could afford, in a body that was fed and rested, in a life that was quietly and stubbornly becoming its own thing, it didn't feel like a door slamming. It felt like a window opening. It felt like air. Thank you for being here and listening to my story. If any part of this felt familiar, if you've ever been the strong one, the one who gives until there's nothing left, I want you to know that you're not alone and that this community is a place where your story matters. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to Mila Revenge Stories and hit the like button so more people who need to hear this can find it.